Good afternoon, everyone. Yat She'e Heather Fleming Inishya. I'm a member of the Navajo Nation and also the executive director at Change Labs. Bit ani nishle, bilagana bashishchin, tkodachini dashe, do bilagana dashanala. And I wanted to start by introducing all of you to Change Labs in Tuba City. Hannah, next slide. Change Labs is an organization that provides creative workspace, tools, resources, and knowledge for Native entrepreneurs. Specifically, we have 5 programs, all of which are designed to foster the creation and growth of businesses in and around our local community. So I just wanted to quickly run you through what some of these programs look like so that you know what you might be able to take advantage from Change Labs. So first up, we do have an in-house resident designer, and her name is Mariah Ashley. She's a wonderful web designer, actually, and we're in the wake of COVID, we're having her focus on helping some of the entrepreneurs in our community transition online. So if you are looking for one-on-one help, either developing a website or getting other creative materials ready for your business, our resident designer might be a great resource for you. And then next, we also have a co-working studio in Tuba City that is open. I know even though Navajo and Hopi are still in the process of reopening, because we're an entrepreneur support organization, we've been continued providing desk space, free Wi-Fi, and then providing tools like printing and other marketing tools for entrepreneurs in our community. We're open every Monday through Friday from 10 to 3, and we'll be expanding our hours starting September 1st. We also probably are most known for the business incubator that we run across Navajo and Hopi, also engaging entrepreneurs from White Mountain Apache and the Pueblo communities. Each year we select 20 high potential Native entrepreneurs to enroll in this one-year program that includes one-on-one coaching, peer development, and a year of training on a lot of business fundamentals, and also eligibility for a $10,000 loan when you graduate from the program. And today, over the next 90 minutes, we, Change Labs and our partners at Causal Design, want to dive deeply into the data, the recommendations, and the findings from our first report titled Doing Business on the Navajo Nation. I'm going to ask my colleagues from Causal Design to step us through that, and there will be time at the end for clarifying questions from our audience. And then immediately following that, we're going to go into a moderated discussion with Navajo entrepreneurs and stakeholders, and that'll be moderated by Ms. Charlene Begay-Platero. And then once our entrepreneurs and stakeholders are finished sharing their stories, we wanted to leave some time at the end for any questions and feedback from the audience. Today, we're focusing on the issue of land. Last week, we focused on the issues of registering and certifying a business on the Navajo Nation. Next Tuesday, we're going to talk about the credit environment and what could a Navajo banking system look like. And in the final webinar in this 4-part series, we're going to look at what it takes to grow and operate a business on the Navajo Nation. So we definitely invite you to tune in to all 4. This 4-part series. Everything is going to be recorded, and you can also find the recorded materials on the Change Labs YouTube channel, and I'll put a link in for that after we get started. So now I'm going to hand it over to my colleagues Hannah and Raymar at Causal Design to step us all through the data of what it takes to register land, deal with construction permits, and get electricity set up for a new business. If you want to access the report where this is all coming from, I encourage you to visit nativestartup.org/doing business to download your own copy. And of course, if you have any questions throughout this webinar, you can add them into the chat window, and myself and Causal will be looking at that to make sure your questions get answered. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Raymar.
Thanks, Heather. And hello again, everyone. My name is Raymar Macaranis. I'm one of the co-founders of Causal Design. It's good to be back in this installment of the doing business discussion. As Heather mentioned, Causal Design is a research firm that conducts economic and impact analysis to help organizations like Change Labs improve the lives of members in their community. And for the past several years now, we've supported the Change Labs team in setting up systems that help them both measure and understand their impact on the small business community on the Navajo Nation. Now, there's the point I wanted to stress after last week's meeting, and it's kind of an understanding of what some of the goals of this research are. Now, on the one hand, it's important to make sure that this type of work sparks conversation and a back and forth that we can help turn into real change in policy. Another goal is to help give the nation a kind of benchmark on the overall health of small businesses. Now, we're just looking at a very specific dimension here, but what we're really hoping for is the ability to help community members and policymakers understand, how changes and reforms might change the day-to-day environment for Navajo entrepreneurs, whether it's in terms of time or money or really even just headaches in navigating the system and where these pain points really are. Hannah, who has led this research and will walk us through some of the findings, will well, I'll hand it off to her so she can explain sort of the main takeaways of all that. But yeah, again, trying to understand where this comes from, where this fits in, and kind of where our place is in that whole process. It's yeah. Well, with that, I'll hand it off to her to talk about what we came away with.
Sure. Hi, thanks for that, Raymar. Hello, everyone. My name is Hannah Pruitt. I've been working with Causal Design for a little over a year now. And that entire time I've spent working with Change Labs and a good chunk of that on this project. So I'm really excited to get to share some of the findings with you all today. I said that I've been with Change Labs for the past year, but their work on Navajo Nation goes back far beyond that. For the past 5 or 6 years, they've been working directly with Native entrepreneurs and Navajo business owners and offering them direct support. And over these years, they've collected stories and anecdotes about what business owners find challenging on starting and operating a business on Navajo Nation. And after collecting a lot of these stories, it led them to ask the question, what exactly makes doing business on Navajo Nation so difficult? And they brought this question to us, and we decided to answer it with something we call doing business. The doing business methodology is a methodology that was piloted by the World Bank. They've conducted it annually for the past 20 years in over 190 countries across the world. But really at its core, it is a tool for trying to understand all of the different things that a business owner would need to consider whenever they're starting a new business. So what exactly does it measure? What exactly does it do? It takes a hypothetical business, or what we call a case study business, and it move through all of the different steps and processes that someone would need to do to start and operate a business. So that includes opening a business, so starting a business, registering it, getting all of your tax accounts set up. We added a Navajo-specific indicator around the business certification process. It looks at what would it take for this business to get a location. How might they approach the process to access land? Once they get land, how would they be able to build structures on it? And once they build those structures, how might they be able to connect it to electricity? It looks at the credit environment, and whenever this hypothetical business goes to grow, how might they be able to access financing? And lastly, it looks at how this business would complete day-to-day operations like paying taxes, and how can they be sure that they're operating in a secure environment? Like, are they able to enforce their contracts? And there are 4 different lenses that this analysis looks at. The first of which is complexity. So within each of these 8 different indicator sets, it looks at how complex the process might be, or how many different steps this business would need to go through in order to complete one of them. So how many steps would it take to access land? It looks at the time investment. So how many days would it take to complete this process? It looks at the cost, the monetary costs. So things like how much would it need to pay for permits, for fees or fines in order to complete this process. And the last lens is quality of regulation. And this is a bit softer, and it looks at, we know that there are certain regulations out there that benefit business activity, that is supportive for a business. And so what this really tries to get at is it goes through and benchmarks if these certain regulations are in place for each of these different indicator sets. And together, we think that this builds into what we believe is the business environment. So all of these aspects are different things that a business would need to contend with in order to start, grow, and operate their business. And today, as we've alluded to, we're only going to be focusing on one aspect, which I will say is a kind of meaty chunk of the analysis of getting a location. So accessing land, dealing with construction permits, and getting electricity. And lastly, we knew that we wanted to complete this analysis on Navajo Nation. We wanted to see what the business environment looked like for Native entrepreneurs. So we chose to do this both in Tuba City, where Change Labs is located, and in Shiprock. So that is where this hypothetical business would be located. But we thought what might glean the best insight, or where we might learn the most, is comparing if that same exact business was instead located in a border town like Cortez. How much easier or more difficult might it be for them to move through these same processes? And so with that, I'll move through our findings. I apologize if I'm going a bit quickly, but as I mentioned, it is a meaty chunk of analysis to get through. So starting with accessing land, we found that if a business is located on Navajo as opposed to in Cortez, there are 4 times as many steps that they must go through, or their application goes through, in order to ultimately access land. And as a result, it ends up taking about 6 times as long to complete this process on Navajo as compared to in Cortez. And it is a touch more expensive, about 1.3 times more expensive, but not substantially so. So putting this into context, if you were in last week's webinar, you'll recognize these guys. We have Nick on the left, who is an entrepreneur located in Shiprock, and he opened a screen printing shop. And then we have an entrepreneur on the right who's located in Cortez, who also opened a screen printing shop. And if they both wanted to access land, and they made their to-do list for what they needed to accomplish to move through this process, this is what Nick's to-do list would look like. It's about 19 different steps. And in comparison, the Cortez entrepreneur has about 5 steps, about a quarter as many things that they need to accomplish. And walking through all of these steps and checking them off their to-do list ends up taking quite a bit of time. For Nick in Shiprock, in the best case scenario, it takes about 274 days, as opposed to in Cortez, where it only takes 47 days. And as I mentioned in the introduction of this research, this analysis is completed in 190 countries across the globe. So essentially it takes the same exact business and tries to have them access land, or looks at what it would take to access land in 190 different countries. And whenever we look at all these processes, we can then compare how easy or difficult it is in one context versus the other. And it can rank them in scores from 1, or rank number 1 to 190, where it is the hardest to access land. Coming in at number 1, we have Qatar, where you really only need to go to one ministry and file one piece of paper, and it's completed in one day to access land. Cortez falls around number 23, right above the US average, which looks at New York City and LA at number 39. At rank number 170, we have the Central African Republic. And right behind them at 171 is Navajo Nation. And what this really means is, just to put it into context, that it is more difficult to access land on Navajo Nation than almost anywhere else in the world. By every metric, this is true across the different lenses that we looked at. And this is also true on the global stage. And we think that this is really why we see so many Navajo business owners operating on or at roadside stands, why we see so many people operating from flea markets or operating their businesses out of their homes, because it's just that difficult in order to get a place to do business. And worst case scenario, we see a lot of Navajo businesses migrating to border towns. So for example, this is Laura Cleland of Saltwoman LLC, who operates a foot wellness center that has a lot of different holistic medicinal practices. And she originally wanted to locate her business in Delkin, and because of the nature of her business, she wasn't able to operate from a roadside stand or in a flea market or from her home. And for months, she tried to find a spot in Delkin in order to do her business and was unable to do so. And then reluctantly moved to Winslow, where she was able to find a storefront pretty quickly and affordably. So moving into the next part, dealing with construction permits. So if we take this hypothetical business in both Cortez and on Navajo, and they've accessed land and now they want to build a structure on it, what would that process look like for them? And what we found is that Navajo Nation doesn't necessarily have a process for reviewing building applications and permitting for privately pursued construction. So if an individual business wants to build something, there isn't necessarily a place where you go to submit your building plans, have them review it, and issue a building permit. And so as a result, private contractors may deal with less bureaucracy, but by the same end, they do experience higher levels of uncertainty when they're not 100% sure how to go about this process. I will add one caveat that the Navajo Nation Division of Community Development does exist, and they do have their own system for reviewing building plans and issuing permits. However, these only apply to buildings that are built by the tribal government or for tribal government purposes, such as the Tuba City Chapter House pictured here, and they don't review individual or privately pursued construction. And then our last segment that we're looking at today is getting electricity. So if each of these businesses have built this structure and now they want to get or establish an electrical connection with it, what would that process look like? And we found that it actually is less complex on Navajo. It requires 2 fewer steps than it would in Cortez. However, despite this, it takes about 6.5 times as long and is 4 times as expensive on Navajo as compared to Cortez. There's also an aspect of the getting electricity indicator that touches on this quality of regulation piece, which I discussed at the entry. And this looked at the reliability of supply. So it asks questions like, how frequently does the power go out? And if there is a power outage, how long would it take to restore it? It asks, does the utility have to pay a fine or compensate customers in the case of excessive outages? And do they have automated tools in order to monitor and restore power rather than relying on people calling in and reporting power outages or dispatching field maintenance crews? And we think that all of these things build in to create a electric infrastructure that is reliable and can support a business environment. And what we found was that the Navajo power system does not experience more power outages than Cortez. As far as frequency is concerned, you're not more likely to have a power outage when you're on Navajo versus Cortez. However, in the case of a power outage, it takes 90 times as long to restore power on Navajo as compared to in Cortez. And we think that a lot of this comes from the lack of automated tools to both detect outages and restore power. And again, this is another one of the indicator sets that we can compare to the global stage. So coming in at rank number 1, it is the easiest place to get electricity in the United Arab Emirates, where it's both very quick and very cheap to access. And the United States comes in at rank number 63, and Cortez not far behind at rank 84. And then we have Navajo Nation comes at rank 167, right ahead of Uganda at 168. And so as we saw with land, it is more difficult to access a secure and reliable electrical connection on Navajo Nation as compared to almost anywhere else in the world. And this can be really economically prohibitive if you are a business that relies on this. So if Nick has his screen printing shop in Shiprock and he has a power outage that lasts a really long time, he's unable to produce his screen prints, and that, multiplied out can create a big impact on businesses. Just to highlight one of the Change Labs entrepreneurs again, this is Suzanne Singer of Native Renewables, who started a nonprofit that tries to fill this gap with solar power, both in Navajo homes and businesses. And so to close my segment today, I just wanted to note, we collected all of this data and we synthesized and analyzed it. And we thought the best foot forward is to try to come up with what we thought are feasible ways that we could improve these 3 aspects, both in the short term, so things that Change Labs or their partners could do tomorrow or next week, and what are some longer term, more strategic goals that Change Labs could focus on. So for getting land, we thought that Change Labs could serve as a voice for the business community, given that they work directly with so many entrepreneurs, to connect them with resources like the RBDOs, DED, and Navajo Nation Land Department, to really discuss where the bottlenecks in this business site leasing process is, with the goal of identifying priority areas for reform. Another short-term goal we thought could be, whenever you step through the business site leasing process, there are a number of different procedures such as land surveys, cultural clearances, biological and environmental surveys that the Navajo Nation can offer to complete, or you can privately contract these things out. And often it is significantly quicker to do this privately. And so if Change Labs could have a reliable list of contractors who can complete these processes for their entrepreneurs, it will reduce the amount of time that it might take to access land. And in the longer term, and I believe one of our panelists today, if he was able to join, will be able to speak more to this, is the idea that the individual chapters or the Navajo tribal government more broadly could establish economic zones along roadsides and in communities that are already designated for commercial activity, with the goal of reducing the time it takes and the burden that it places on entrepreneurs to access lands. So to move quickly through the last couple, with construction permits, similarly to the list of contractors for surveys in the land section, creating a list of individual contractors that we know are familiar with building on Navajo who can navigate this uncertainty and in the short term, build things for Navajo businesses. And in the longer term, creating internal structures within community development to expand their procedures that apply to tribal government construction to also include privately pursued construction. And lastly, with electricity, we saw there were two realms here, one of which is accessibility. So trying to compile all the ways through which businesses can access electricity and also to make it more affordable. So engaging in TOA around the potential for providing supportive subsidies to businesses or streamlining service delivery to small business owners. And then in the longer term, trying to use their position as a mouthpiece or a voice for the business community on Navajo Nation to help the utility and different government agencies to really understand the difficulties and the burdens that it places on the business community by not having access to reliable electricity, and then taking that dialogue and leveraging it into a broader strategy that really drives meaningful change and reform. So I know that that was a sprint, but I wanted to close with just leaving time for some of you guys to ask me questions. If you have any questions specifically about the research or the data or how we might have collected this kind of information before we move on to our panelists. So with that, I will open it up to you guys. Not all at once, everyone.
Sounds easy. Well, if there's no questions, then we might move along to our panelists. Unless, Kim, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just had a quick question about how the locations were chosen. You mentioned Shiprock, Tuba, and Cortez. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. So whenever we originally created the plan for this analysis, we thought that Tuba City was an important location because that is where Change Labs is established. That's where a lot of the entrepreneurs in their network are. And we wanted to also choose a different chapter that might have a different governance structure or different processes than Tuba. And so we selected Shiprock, which is in New Mexico. It doesn't have the same designations status as Tuba City to issue some of their own land leases. So we thought there might be some variation in the processes there. And then we selected Cortez as the off Navajo Nation comparison, or the border town comparison, because it was the most similar to Shiprock and Tuba in terms of its size and what its economic profile might look like. Because places like Gallup and Page and Flagstaff are much larger and have a much bigger presence of manufacturing or industrial processes. So their kind of economies are more fundamentally different than Cortez's might be.
All right, we have 3 quick questions. The first one, Hannah, I'm not sure you're going to be able to answer, but I'm going to put it out there because it's a great question. Summer Brown asks, are there restrictions or regulations that make it hard to use solar power for businesses on Navajo?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah,
We focused on establishing, a more traditional electrical connection. But from my experience collecting data, I think the answer might be yes, just because of the nature of how things tend to work within TUA.
okay. We can look more into that too, Summer. And then Evelina Boone in Zuni asks, good day. What is the next step after this process? Is it policy development?
Sure, yeah. So originally we thought the next step would be to complete this analysis all across the Navajo Nation. We now are seeing that so many of these processes are governed by the same bodies, so there won't really be a difference if your business is in Shiprock or if your business is in Dilkin. And so we are expanding it to look at individual sectors. And we're also working directly with DED to expand this research around COVID and how that might impact the business community, and offering some steps forward or recommendations for economic strategy. Raymer, I'm not sure if you have any other thoughts on that you wanted to touch on, but I think that that is the idea.
Yeah, no, the only other thing I'd add is that, you know, we wanted to create some kind of, you know, bench line base mark, right? So while policy development is definitely a goal, what we sort of weren't really seeing kind of in Navajo was this sort of idea of, you know, if we did help, you know, create reform, if we did help come up with policy solutions, how would we be able to figure out whether or not they were working, and to what degree, and what would be the ways that people on the ground would see those improvements? And so a lot of this effort was trying to understand, okay, well, how are some of these bottlenecks playing out for community members? And, you know, what it helps us understand is, you know, if a reform is effective, it would alleviate some of these things, whether it's reducing the amount of time it takes, reducing the cost, or making the process easier. So, you know, by doing this, we've compiled kind of just a very maybe baseline set. This is sort of the state of the world. And we brought Cortez in because really that's just the first benchmark. But I think for the future, and you know, if we're able to continue this, we would use past years and stay within the Navajo Nation and say, okay, well, over the past 5 years, we have increased this process by X%, right? And we'd be able to show this trend. And so, you know, what we want is to create a data set and a tool that's really focused on the issues that are, you know, really at the center of the Navajo Nation, not necessarily compared to, you know, places outside, but make and help craft solutions that are Navajo Nation specific. And so that's a point that I think is really important.
Thanks everyone for your questions. I want to make sure we have time at the end too for more questions and more stories. So we're going to move on to the moderating session of today's presentation, because in collecting all this data, it was clear that the process of collecting the data gives us a baseline, but it's also, I don't know I'm trying to think of the right way to say this, but I think anybody on this call who's applied for a business site lease probably wasn't able to get it in 274 days. It usually takes much longer than that. So there's still a difference between data and the reality. And so when we created these sessions, it was important for us to look at the data, because the data already paints a pretty poor story. But then when you actually look at the reality, the situation can often get worse. So we've invited special guests today, and also Miss Charlene Begay-Platero of the Navajo Nation Project Development Department to moderate today's session. So I am going to hand it over now to Miss Charlene Begay-Platero to step us through the next 40 minutes.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar, and I'm calling in from Church Rock, where my office is, and I work for the nation and project development, and we have two focuses in our departments, commercial and industrial, and I'm the only one in the office that does industrial. So I take care of the industrial parts on Navajo, in Arizona and New Mexico. Unfortunately, we don't have one in Utah yet, but hopefully someday we will. And so I've been working here for a long time, and I am willing to answer questions offline if you want as well. I hope to help you in any way I can and maybe guide you. But here today, we're here with 3 people. Cheryl Anyazi, who is a founder of a business called Coffee Pot Farms in Dilcon, and a good friend, Kim Conejo. She is the owner of Fourth Wheel Design Group, and our office has worked with her about 3 times in our work, and she's has a firm. Her firm is in Phoenix, but she's originally from Fort Defiance. And then our dear friend, my dear friend Henry Silent Man, who works in Shiprock in the Northern or Shiprock RBDO office. RBDO stands for Regional Business Development Office. There's a lot of acronyms when you work for a tribal government and any kind of government. So let's get started. Change Labs asked each of you three to provide your unique view on land access as an entrepreneur. Sherilyn, your business is completely dependent on your ability to access land. Kim, you spent years working with tribal communities on the topic of economic development. And Henry, you've dedicated your career in helping people navigate through our business site leasing process. So for those of you watching and listening, we have a series of questions for each of our guests, and we'll invite you at the end for your own questions or share your perspective. Because of the ability to develop infrastructures is dependent on our ability to first access land, like we learned about the data. Today's moderated questions are focused on the issue of land only. So we'll start with the entrepreneurs. Sherilyn, good afternoon. As a farmer whose activity requires land in order to be successful, what aspects of the research that was presented with your experience in acquiring land for your farms? Can you tell us about that?
Well, I thought the report was pretty accurate. I did think that one part that was left out was the water piece, because as a farmer, land, you have to make sure you have plenty of land to be able to grow. And then following that, you must have the water. And I know today we brought up the electricity part, and that's important also, especially if you're going to be a market farmer or a grower, because you have to make sure you're following your food safety protocols or whatever. And so that is very important as well. Yes.
Well,
Is that good?
thank you for that. And the researchers will take note of that. And then Kim, your company conducted research for most recent Navajo economic development study. The research findings sound familiar to you that these two presented today? Any takeaways that you could help us with?
I'm on mute. Yes, just before I begin though, I wanted to introduce myself. Got a Kim Kanuho Yanshia, Tabahanishla, Twittini Bashichin, Ado, Honorahi Dashache, Do, Glashri Dashanella. And happy to be here, president of Fourth World Design Group. And yes, going through the study that's being put together by Change Labs, we're very familiar with the ins and outs of doing business on Navajo, both as a planner, as an entrepreneur. And so in general, you know, I think developing land takes a lot of management, organization, and communication. And on Navajo, we certainly know the issues. I mean, based on the work that we've done up on Navajo and the projects that we've worked on. But overall, I think we really need to be more strategic in our development. And I think this study will really help us do that, kind of seeing what issues and challenges there are, but what solutions as well. And I hate to use McDonald's as an example, but, you know, as an entrepreneur, you know, we're in the business to make money. You know, we're not in the business to lose money. And so, for example, McDonald's is very strategic in terms of finding a location in a community or a town or a city, you know, based off of real estate location, based off of access to infrastructure, based off of economic feasibility studies, you know, really looking at the data to see how viable their business will be. And so I think study will really help our Navajo entrepreneurs as well as our tribe to be more strategic in their development. So I hope that answers the question.
This is Sherilyn. I did also want to kind of, talk about a little bit of how, I know Kim's talking about being strategic. So the land where I'm growing on, it comes from my paternal grandparents. And so sometimes we want to be strategic. We want to, we also want to help our families and our community. And that's kind of the reason why, for me, I decided to kind of go back to that space because my Nolly lady, her Nolly lady, which was also a Winnebago clan, had given her and told her that she had to stay back from going to boarding school, and she was going to be responsible to take care of that piece of land. And so now my Nolly lady has kind of said for me, okay, now I'm going to give you give you this land to be able to do something with it. And so that's one of my reasons for continuing to try to do something that's going to either put to be able to help feed myself and my family, and also maybe the community, and then being able to take care of it as well. And so, and speaking of that, and she just didn't give me the land. Part of it had to be a process to where it took my Nolly man, when he passed away about 7 years ago. It sounded to me like the way I understood it was then the time and the clock or whatever started ticking, and there's a time frame where the other family members have to wait, or if somebody else wanted it, then they go in and go through the court process. And so that was that time where I, just being respectful to my uncles and my aunts, I told them, well, if you guys are going to take this land and you do something with it, I'm going to wait. So I really did have to wait the 6 to 7 years. So when that finally passed and nobody wanted to, come in and do something with it, then I went ahead and filed the paperwork, and we went through the courts to get a quiet title. And that's just for the 1 acre. Okay. There's not even talking about like the old cornfield. And the old cornfield is about 35 acres. And that's another process where you're going to withdraw that land and do some to be able to grow back and to be able to grow in it. So that part, so those 2 pieces I had to kind of talk with my relatives, talk with my family, and just let them know what I was planning to do and that I was serious about this. And so I left my full-time job to be able to come back, and I learning about how do you grow stuff. And so for now, we are growing on our little 1 acre, and that's that's where we're starting with. And so the next piece is we're going to withdraw additional land to grow more. But before we even move past our 1 small acre, the piece that we're going to be looking at is making sure that we get water. So this year our project is how do we put a well in, and what's that process look like, what kind of approvals do we need? And so we are talking with people who drill wells and hydrologists, geologists, and even that takes a lot of money, because where I'm at, I think the depth to get water is like 600 feet. And so it's starting to add up. And I like how Kim had brought up, being strategic, and we want to make money. And I know it's going to take me a long time to make that money back, but I really am trying to be respectful and what my Nolly is trying to help me to, you know, continue on, is, you know, taking care of that land and all of the stuff that, you know, was brought down and that she's passing on to me. And I think, especially now with COVID happening, what, you know, what's going on, I think food and just being able to grow your own food is really important. You know, I'm seeing many types of, you know, when COVID started, there's like a run on all of this essential stuff, you know, shipping in. I'm seeing just food being shipped in, and I'm like, why can't we even have our own farmers? You know, the farmers should be being able to provide all of this. But then you talk to the farmers again, you know, I know farmers is like, well, it's back to the land, and we don't have water and, you know, electricity and such, and it's all the stuff that was in the report. And I was like, wow, all of this, you know, even we're not talking about it, but is, you know, being able to have funding to put your infrastructure in place. You know, I like the idea of going solar, having solar for, you know, a lot of our needs. But again, it goes back to also having all of this. So everything, it just seems to keep going in circles. And that's all, you know, you end up doing this, you just keep turning around and you're chasing your tail. You're like, come on, we got to stop chasing my tail. So everything in that report was really good to read, because I knew there was something happening, but I just didn't know like the specifics of where those holes were, or gaps. So I hope that was kind of helpful.
Well, thank you, Cheryl, and thanks for sharing your story. And you know, in the outside world, people have the ability, I guess, or capability, or they have the uniqueness of their they get to go work for dad or mom in their store or their business, and then they run the company for the next generation. But yours is a unique story of a different kind of generational type of business into farming, and it's great to hear that. And I'm glad you were able to get the land and you were persistent and tenacious about that. That's so wonderful. So the next questions are for our government guys that are on the line, which is Henry and Nelson. Welcome, Nelson. It's Charlene from Church Rock. Henry, I understand. I like to understand more about the history of reform of business site leasing process as a RBDO staffer, and you sit on the business site leasing committee. Is there new efforts to streamline the process?
Oh, good afternoon, Charlene. Thank you for having me here. Thank you for Heather and Change Labs and Causal Design for the great report. And it has some, you know, dismal information there. It looks very pessimistic, and but business site leasing, that's all we do at our office. Our office, we work with 24 chapters from. Well, let me back up and introduce myself. My name is Henry Silentman. I'm an economic development specialist in the Shiprock RBDO. My clan is Nakaidina, and I'm Hawafwana Bashishchin. My Che is Torchini, and my Nulli is Glashchini. So hello to everyone on the call, and thank you for having me here. So business site leasing is all we do. Well, it's not all we do, but that's mostly what we do at our office. We work with 22 chapters from Denahoto to Counselor, New Mexico, and south to Sheep Springs, and the northern chapters in our area. It's quite a big area, but we do have quite a few clients in Shiprock, and I've been with the Navajo Nation for about 14 years, so it'll be 14 years in November, and I talk to people, like Sherilyn, almost daily about business site leasing, and working on their leases and getting them, their leases done. And and sometimes, it seems like, our division or our department is not who they should be working with. For example, farming, that's probably more agricultural department. And so, we would look at their specific situations and such, and but we do work a lot with chapters. So the Navajo Nation has a business site leasing regulation that was taken over from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and that was in 2006. So before 2006, all leases were done through the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And since I started in 2006, all I've known is and worked with is the Navajo Nation leasing regulations. So in 2008, there was new regulations that allowed the chapters or these different organizations like the shopping centers to be able to come up with their own regulations, and that's what Tuba City and Nelson had done, to do their own leasing within their own communities. And so that is a new process since 2008. So pre-COVID, we were looking at making more changes to the regulations. The last time it was updated was in 2006. And that was actually the 2004 regulations, I believe, is the, oh, no, I'm sorry. Charlene, was 2006, and then we did an update in 2009. So I don't have my regulations right in front of me, but 2009 we did an update, and so 2020 hopefully we'll have another update of these regulations. But it seems a cumbersome process, and it's a cumbersome process that we inherited from the BIA. And so a lot of the I think one of the issues that I see is that when the BIA reverted to Navajo Nation leasing regulations, none of the funding, came from the BIA. The BIA used to do the environmental review, the appraisals, and so they have a large mechanism to do that. But we didn't have that, and we didn't have any of the funding that, that the BIA had to do those processes. But so, I think, one of the things I see in the findings is lack of transparency. I think, with our office, we are, we try to be, transparent in the process that we're doing things. And if it's working with the environmental regulations, if it's working with cultural resources, if it's working with, the business regulatory for the corporations, procurement clearances, these different steps, we try to be transparent to let people know, what's involved in that and how they need to comply with the regulations. Charlene, I'm not sure if that answered your question, but.
Well, we're due for a updating, and we've discussed that, and it's very heated discussions, right, Henry, on trying to make it easier for businesses with our different personalities, as DED employees, and we always try to fight for someone to make it better for them, to make it easier for them. But I have one more question for you, Henry. What you process business site leases all the time. What takes most of your time in that process when you work with someone, when you work with a client? And what big hang up do you have that you think needs to be changed?
So I think, there's some, steps that are more cumbersome and they're more problematic. Let's take, for example, the procurement clearances. So we look at, go to 5 different departments and ask them, is this company or is this person compliant with your, do they owe you any money, or do they owe Navajo Nation any money? Before, it had been a self-certification. You had an application, and then on the application, you asked them, do you owe the Navajo Tax Commission any money? And then you check yes or no, and we believe them. And but a lot of the times, our department, our program, we are responsible for, it looks like we're responsible for collections. We have to make sure that, they don't owe any money to Navajo Nation Tax Commission. And the only way we can do that is to request that information from the tax department. And that can be cumbersome at times. These checks, they have an expiration date. So it's, I'm not sure, what happened that, in our business procurement regulations changed, that we have to, instead of just checking the box and, taking them for their word, we have to, go to these offices. And I think that, that's kind of, a cumbersome part, but, I'm sure, there's, different ways of, different things and processes that could be improved for sure.
Okay, Nelson, welcome. And as a planner out at the local government in Tuba City, what is the problem for the lack of space for local businesses that you have come to see as a planner in that community? Nelson, can you hear me? You're still on mute. Is he speaking?
There we go.
Okay.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting myself and the Tuba City chapter. And thank you, Change Labs, for bringing us together to discuss some of these business economic issues. As far as the problem with lack of space, Tuba City has a large lack of space. We have the county island that takes the main a large corridor in Tuba, as well as the BIA and the hospital, which are downtown Tuba. Right now, we are actually competing with the hospital and getting relinquished lands, and we're trying to get all of it from the BIA. The hospital themselves have the same issue with not enough land, and they continue to grow as Tuba City continues to grow. So we do have 5 schools in Tuba. I think the main constraint came when they went ahead and solidified the administrative area. It's pretty much full. There is limited spacing. And one of the other issues I think I could tell is that, which wasn't followed, was giving that economic zone from the main roads, where it's supposed to be at 750 feet. We have a lot of residential right up against the road. So obviously that wasn't followed. So I think those are like kind of the main issues, which regulation wasn't followed as far as economic zoning and the administrative area. I mean, I'm sure they couldn't foresee back in the 30s when they made it that how big Tuba City was going to get. But that is a big constraint. We are trying to figure out the language when they did lift the freeze. Did that also lift that administrative area zone, the boundary? So that language we haven't found. We've been looking for it since I came on board in January of this year. And so that's something I've been working with BIA and the land department and our council delegate to try to figure out. And then again, with spacing, the way it wasn't planned, there is a lot of departments in Tuba City because it is Western agency, and the departments are all spread out across Tuba. So one of the just to jump ahead, one of the remediations is to put them in one building, and we call it the one-stop shop. So people who come to Tuba City from Western agency don't have to run around Tuba City. They could just go to one building and take care of all their business in one building.
So the land that you're going to get hopefully transferred from the Bureau to the community, to the city community, to the chapter or the local government. Have you started a master plan to get ready for, how you're going to put the small businesses in certain lots?
You mean a master plan? We do have one copy of a rendering. I want to say it's a master plan. I haven't really observed it. So that was provided by Change Labs, I believe, 2016, I believe. I'm not quite sure. Is that correct?
I guess that's for Heather.
We did do a community event in early 2017, a dinner at the chapter where we asked people to, or invited people to sort of map out what the future of Tuba City could look like. So I think that might be the document.
Yeah. Okay. No, we haven't done a master plan. Right now, it's just learning. This is going to be my first attempt at getting relinquished land. And like I said, we're racing with the Tuba City Hospital, who has a head start on us. And so the reason for that, though, is also for economic development, especially the area on Main Street. So a Main Street, and then, like the 750 feet buffer for economic development along highways and major roads in the chapter out area. So we are doing that for that. We are doing that withdrawal from the DIA for economic development.
So Charlene, Shiprock is also doing a trying to recoup land from the BIA as well. But regarding the land designation, the land withdrawal, I mean, we usually leave that up to the chapters to designate land either through their community land use planning committees, and they have a club a plan, a land use plan, and we would like to see that the chapters follow through on these land use plans to say, when these areas are designated for businesses, commercial areas, that they be withdrawn for commercial development and get the necessary documents beforehand, like the permittee, the permittee signatures and such. But one thing on the land withdrawal is, when it was a BIA process, the land withdrawal required, it was not designated for one company, or it was just a purpose, and that was recorded in the title plan for the BIA. But now the designation, the land designation, it doesn't require recording, and it has to be specific for that company. So some of those changes made it, makes it difficult to designate land as commercial. Some of the business sites that we do have in our communities, they were already designated, by the BIA process. So I think, that's something that, we should look at, that we withdraw the land, for commercial sites. Charlene?
Okay, thank you. Those are the only questions I have thus far. Does anyone have any questions from our audience? Just unmute yourself and go. If not, I have one for the researchers. Did you ever think about comparing the Kayenta Township with Shiprock, because they're both Navajo, both communities on the reservation?
Yeah, we did think about that originally. However, I'm sure people are familiar that Kayenta and Tuba have a different LGA status that might affect how these processes are done in those communities. And it's not necessarily representative of the other 108 chapters out there. And so we wanted to select one who does not have an LGA status similar to that. So that's how we landed on Shiprock. We definitely wanted to pick Tuba because that's where Change Apps is. But incorporating Kayenta is something that we're considering for next year's research.
Okay. I have a question for Nelson. Based on my experience, because like in Shiprock, for example, this Shiprock chapter created a planning commission, and I think they meet monthly, but they're very very future-oriented folks from different parts of the community, different disciplines. Have you thought about doing maybe a commission to help you as a staffer?
I think I caught all of what you said. When I came in January, what Tuba City chapter has is not a club. They have a planning and zoning commission. And when you said mature, I'm thinking like you mean old people. No. When you say mature, I guess I'm thinking you're suggesting like maybe people with experience from NHA, NTUA, maybe even the RBDO, maybe from the schools, maybe even some business leaders from the community. That's what I'm thinking when you say mature. Maybe even they bring in outsource and bring in some type of company that helps them strategically plan for economic development, something in that sense. But Tuba, when I came, they were had almost completed their land use plan. And so when it was given to me to revise and edit, I did find quite a bit of discrepancies. So I spent quite a bit of time with them in the evening times. We did actually meet I made them go page by page on this 98-page document. And we got it reduced to about 78 pages. As far as the economic development side for planning and zoning, it was pretty weak. And so after the pandemic happened and a lot of the focus was on the effect or the impact on the economy, it's brought new light and perspective for planning, more planning on the economics of Tuba City. So as of right now, I like Tuba City's position. Before I came, or right when I came, they had someone from RBDO They had somebody from Inukshey, somebody from NTUA, and they actually had their president is also a business owner in the community. And they have sort of a traditional outlook pertaining to land use. And those are the individual characteristics on that planning and zoning. So because of COVID, they are mature. So they are, part of that group that's considered high risk. So they haven't met in quite a bit of time, and because of the maturity, they're not savvy with technology. So it's kind of a waiting game for us here. I do talk with them over the phone. And as far as a conference call, we haven't even had one yet. So I am pressing the planning and zoning here in Tuba to get back to what it is, but it's because of that maturity, the age, they are kind of resistant. So I'm working on that. But I do like your suggestion. For me as a planner, what I see now is more networking, inviting, like I said, the stakeholders who deal with a lot with the businesses, with the infrastructure, bring them all in at least quarterly, and also use them as a guide and as a resource in future planning for the business side, the business side, land leasing side. I think that's a very good tactic and strategy to go on moving forward. So that makes me excited to see what their expertises are, because not only are we dealing with just space, we're dealing with flood zones here. We got to find remediation plans, and those are in the works of going through the procurement process to find engineers to take care of that situation. Sorry, I could talk all day.
Does anyone from the audience have any questions based on the discussion earlier or just most recently? Well, if not, thank you, panelists, for taking the time out and sharing your experiences and your knowledge. We look forward to you to continue the series. It's a 4-part series, and this is the second one, so there's more to come. Thanks, Change Labs, for including me. And if anyone needs help with anything, I can try and help you the best I can. Henry as well. And we at the division are willing to help you. Thank you. Have a great rest of the day.
Charlene, this is Nelson Cody from Tuba City Chapter. I just want to kind of give some recommendations and probably kind of an overview of what Tuba City Chapter is doing. When I came in, the planning and zoning had already identified available lands, and they worked with RDDO. And I went ahead and started checking the status of the land that they had identified, working with RDDO and the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and also with a couple of local survey companies, and picking their brain and getting information from them and data. And so I brought that all back to the planning and zoning. So as far as a chapter track here in Tuba, one of the other strategies is in our planning. Like I said, there's been departments here before I came here. We are trying to move them out and creating space for economic development by moving some of these industrial type sites out to the outer part of Tuba City. Like NTUA. NTUA is looking for a new building, and we're going to move them out further so we could also expand our infrastructure. And moving back to the chapter track, working with and calling on Change Labs. They have a great presence in Tuba City, and so we're basically almost there. We're still in the talks about partnering up. And so, and developing a business site we call it a business district on chapter tract land. And so we want to work on a master plan, and we don't forget our vendors. So we're really supportive of the vendors and working on a vendor village / food court. We don't want to call it flea market no more, but kind of the reality is, I think the bigger chapters like Tuba City, we're fortunate enough to have a budget where we could move things forward, not with economic development, which is paying for and going through the procurement process of getting designs and master plans and things of that sort for these land use plans, and setting up the land withdrawals and doing that big first step. So I think that's probably the recommendation I would put. I mean, if we're going to continue a series on economic development, is helping chapters build that capacity to that point. So I'm looking forward to the city chapter and being their planner. And then seeing you again, Charlene. It's been a while. That is all.
Thank you, Nell. I'll send this back to Change Labs, our host of our discussion today.
And Charlene, I'd like to add something to that too.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, and to Change Labs, who's doing the study, I think when we're talking about business site leasing, I think there's also different types of development that go hand in hand with the business site leasing. Just as Sherilyn indicated, her land is agricultural land, which, she's a business that needs that business site leasing. But then there's also the other types of businesses that, need office space. And I know you mentioned like economic zones. And so Sherilyn, at some point, is going to need to sell her goods or her product and her produce. And, I don't know her business model or structure and how people receive that produce. But, in this case, if we're looking at setting aside land or working with land to develop a grocery store or a flea market or farmer's market for her to travel to and then sell it, I think that also needs to be taken into consideration when updating and streamlining that business site lease process, because I think they go hand in hand. But also from my observation and my experience of working in our tribal Navajo communities, there seems to also be a disconnect in communication. And why I say that is because the chapter house has their own project listing, and then the Navajo Nation has their own project listing, and some of them don't align, and I think there needs to be that connection and communication with the chapters and with the Navajo Nation on that project listing, so then they can better organize and prioritize and even receive funding. And so I think that really needs to also happen. It's not just, about the process, it's that communication piece as well. And I think Nelson kind of touched up on that, reinforming and updating the community about, who's doing what's going to happen, what this project entails, what's the time frame, and really letting them know this is what we're planning and this is what we're doing. So then you get that support of the community, because they all want, to see these projects and improvements to their community, and they really want economic development to work. And so I just wanted to add that in my suggestions in terms of reviewing the study. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Kim. And that's I have an example of that is we just got done with a call we're working with Navajo Department of Transportation with the planning, and Navajo Gaming for Fire Rock and Church Rock chapter and our department to do street lights along 118. And we all talked together for like maybe 4 years. And then finally, gaming was looking to the state legislature for money because it's a state highway, for funds. And I said, hey, I have some money in sales tax. So that's when we all got together, and and that was a collaborative project, but that was because we communicated with each other. And then we got to expand our initial funding to make something greater. So we're gonna see street lights, and they're gonna be solar lights. So it's really exciting project, but that's a good example of, you got to communicate with folks. Thank you, Kim. Okay, Heather, back to you.
Thank you, everyone. These are wonderful anecdotes and just the sort of stories and information that we were looking for to complement the data. So thank you all for your time today and for joining us. We'll wrap this up now for all of you listening in and watching the video. Just a reminder that there's 2 more webinars in this series. Next Tuesday at the same time, we're going to switch gears and look at the credit environment. And that's going to be moderated by my co-founder at Change Labs, Ms. Jessica Stego. And then our last webinar is going to look at what it takes to operate and grow a business on Navajo. We'll be looking at tax payments, how to enforce contracts, more meaty stuff similar to the issues related to land. And before we sign off, I just wanted to give a shout out to 2 ways that we're asking everybody to join us to support Native entrepreneurs. One thing we're hoping our audience takes away from this series is how difficult it is to be a business owner on the Navajo Nation. And I just want to give a shout out to our community in Tuba City and Mr. Nelson Cody Jr. and Chapter President Joe Kitso. The Tuba City in particular has a number of old federal buildings lining our main street, prime real estate in town. And as Nelson said, Tuba is landlocked. There's not a lot of room to expand the town outside of its boundaries. So when we're looking at opportunities for economic development, we can't overlook some of these existing federal buildings that are there occupying space that aren't being used. And what's on the screen right now is a photo of one of the biggest buildings on Main Street, one of the most beautiful too. Change Labs is currently hosting a campaign and a petition to reclaim these buildings, specifically requesting our congressional leaders to clean up the asbestos in these buildings so that they can be released back to the chapter, back to the community. If you're interested in supporting that initiative, you can go to nativestartup.org/BIA cleanup to get a link to sign the petition. We're almost to 1,000 signatures, and we'd love to get to 1,000 signatures before the end of August. And then the second thing that we all can do is just support our local Native businesses. And given that there are so many, for lack of a better term, informal Native businesses in our communities, we've put together a digital yellow pages of Navajo, Hopi, Pueblo-based businesses across the Southwest. If you go to resrising.org, there are more than 500 businesses listed on there. And for many of them, this is their first or only online presence. So these are really some of the hidden gems that maybe only operate in flea markets or roadsides, but we also have some incredible professional vendors in the urban areas and the border towns listed on resrising.org. That's it for today. Thank you again for joining us for Streamlining the Business Site Lease Process for Navajo Entrepreneurs. My name is Heather Fleming, and you are welcome to visit Change Labs in Tuba City or at nativestartup.org to find out more about us. Thank you all for joining.